Hey everyone, welcome to Judging for the Win. I'm Dave, and this is my daily ruling. Today, I'm going to be talking about how to study Magic's rules. And this is this month's patron pick, so first, a huge thank you to all the people who support my channel on Patreon. I have a lot of appreciation for all of you. Now, this is a tough topic, and it is something that I was kind of excited to talk about because, well, I feel like it's something that I have a lot of experience with. And so, what we first want to talk about is, well, what's the best way to learn the rules? And for me, the answer to that is really simple. The answer is a little bit at a time for a long time, which, as far as I'm concerned, is pretty much the best way to learn anything. So, okay, how would you do that for Magic? Well, obviously I'm kind of biased here, but I feel like the daily ruling format really excels at this, and this is one reason why I really like that format, is because it gives you a great opportunity to practice something a little bit at a time for a long time. And of course, it doesn't have to specifically be my content. It can be basically anything as long as you're doing it on a specific regular schedule. I like about once a week, ideally multiple times a week, but not everybody has time for everything like that. So basically, what you want to be doing is some sort of magic content that will help you with your rules and policy knowledge every week. And it doesn't have to be me, like I said, Cranial Insertion, they have weekly articles. That's a great resource. Another thing that has popped up now that kind of wasn't around back when I started and I was learning all of this stuff is there's a lot of Discord and Facebook groups that talk about Magic rules, questions and answers. So if your lifestyle supports it, you can be a member of those sorts of groups and kind of follow along when people do post questions and see like what the answers that people post are and see if you can follow along with those questions and answers. But that's the real root. What's the best way to learn the rules a little bit at a time for a long time. But if you notice, the question at the beginning, the title of this presentation isn't what's the best way to learn the rules, it's what's the best way to study the rules. And those are kind of different. So, I feel like a lot of people, even probably a lot of people that watch my content, is that they would expect that the answer to this question that I would give is, by reading the comprehensive rules. And, certainly that is important, but I don't think that it's a great place to start. I actually don't think that reading the comprehensive rules is how you want to lay the foundation. I think that it's one of those things where, like, after the foundation has been laid, then you can go to the next level by reading the comprehensive rules. And so, in order to kind of illustrate what I mean by this, I want to use kind of a little bit of an analogy. I don't know if anybody's ever used Wikipedia to learn a technical topic, but it's actually kind of difficult, and it kind of boils down to this kind of question here. Why is this even a presentation at all, right, Dave? Like, I can read English. Can't I just study the comprehensive rules by reading them? And yeah, I guess in principle that's true, but for me at least, in the education system for the country that I'm a part of, I had to do literature classes for like around 12 years. And it kind of boils down to the same argument as far as I'm concerned. If I can read English, at least in principle, I can read a book that's in English, like The Adventures of Tom Sawyer, and, yeah, in principle, that would work, right? But it's also the case that I would be getting a lot more out of that experience of reading that book if, for example, I understood a little bit about the background or the context that story was written in. I understood a little bit about the framework that's common to all stories. I understood a little bit about like what kind of symbolism that the author was likely trying to go for. So once you have that background in place, it really sets the stage for a deeper, richer understanding of the book. And the same thing I think is true if you're trying to read a highly technical document such as the comprehensive rules. And unfortunately, unlike literature, it is not the case that I had 12 years worth of experience in school giving me a background in how to read technical language and be able to get the same out of that. So that's the sort of thing. And really, like I mentioned before, if you've ever tried to use Wikipedia for self-study, it's absolutely terrible. But if you are going to try to read this article to learn about this mathematical topic, it would not be good going. Basically, the way these articles are written, it sort of seems like they're assuming that you know literally everything about mathematics except for whatever this one specific topic that the article is written on. So it's basically like ridiculously difficult to actually parse any of this unless you actually like have a really strong background in like what a lot of this stuff is already talking about. And so mathematicians actually have a term that they use to kind of relate to this kind of paradox where you can't really like learn anything about this topic unless you already know a fair amount about it. And the term is kind of a little bit, I think, condescending. The term they use is something called mathematical maturity. But if we kind of broaden our understanding of maturity to mean, maybe not the opposite of immaturity, but, maybe something that correlates with experience and growth in a subject and some certain level of comfort with it, well, in that case, I think that it really does a good job kind of encapsulating what skill set we need for the related to the comprehensive rules in order to successfully read a document like that. And so, I hope people won't take offense at me kind of co-opting this term for what we're going to be talking about here, which is, the skill set that you would need in order to successfully be able to read the comprehensive rules and get answers to rules questions out of it. So that naturally kind of leads to this question: when should you start building up this, quote unquote mathematical maturity, or whatever the corresponding term would be for the comprehensive rules? And this is my personal answer. This is not endorsed by like Judge Academy or anybody in particular. This is my personal opinion, which is that at a minimum you need to be starting to be able to do this sort of stuff when you're working towards level 2. My reasoning for that is, if you're a level 1 judge, I think it's okay, or rather sufficient, if you can just understand what the answer to rules questions is. Right? If you can get the right answer based on the principles, it doesn't matter if you have like a real formal understanding of exactly what structures are in place in order to make the answer be what you're saying that it is. But once you get to level 2, you're going to be expected to be able to explain this stuff to other judges in a level that's at least appropriate for them to be able to understand. And so really, I think that the time for formalism is really when you start getting expected to be able to explain stuff to other people who are going to need to be able to explain it to other people in turn. And so if you are not able to do at least some research on your own, you can't like come up with answers to questions unless you're using the technique of asking somebody else to give you the answer. But when you're going to be a level 2 or higher judge, I think that the expectation should be there that you should be able to come up with some of these answers on your own. And maybe not all of them, because as we'll see later on in this presentation, there are some certain cases with this research where it does require a little bit more depth than might be immediately apparent. But certainly you should be able to take at least the easier kind of questions and come up with answers for those. And so the other answer I would give to this question of when should you start building up this mathematical maturity should be when you start getting interested in it. Don't be limited by don't limit yourself by thinking that this is something that only high-level judges should be doing. Of course not. If you're interested in having the ability to go to the comprehensive rules, figure out what the answer to a question is, and then get an answer that way, then that's great. You should be definitely at least taking steps towards getting yourself up to be comfortable and in a spot where you're able to achieve that goal. And that is a fine goal for anybody to have, not necessarily any judge, not even necessarily someone who's like interested in being part of the judge program. If you're a Magic player who's really interested in the rules, then definitely you should be thinking that you should try to get this understanding if that's what you're interested in, right? So that's kind of my answers is you definitely should be thinking about it if you're trying to become a level 2 judge, or if you're interested in it by yourself, then there's of course no reason why you shouldn't be going for it. So all right, there we go. Now we're really starting to get to the big questions now, which is how can you build your mathematical maturity? And fortunately, unfortunately, whatever you feel about this way, there's no shortcut. The answer to this question is by practicing, and that's it. That is the only way that you can build up your sense with the Magic comprehensive rules up to a high level. And I wish that there was some sort of a shortcut. I especially wish that I was unethical enough to be able to put something like that as a clickbaity thumbnail or title for this video, like learn the CR in 4 easy steps. Unfortunately, there just isn't such a thing. So sorry to burst everybody's bubble, but there you go. So all right, well, next best thing then, how can we practice? And so with this, I think that the real answer, at least as far as I'm concerned, is to do some research for questions that come up. And again, this could be questions that come up in your playgroup, questions that come up in a Discord or a Facebook group that you might be a part of. But think about questions and think about how you would get the answer to them from the comprehensive rules. So, all right, now I think that I've talked long enough, and it is time to actually do some research and show some people, what this process would look like. So, all right, let's go ahead and do that now. So this here is the comprehensive rules. I've brought it up here. If you don't know how to find this document, you literally can just search for Magic CR, and that's the easiest way that I found it. It's not that hard if you know that one easy trick. So there you go. Now, when we're talking about doing research, what I'm talking about is I want you to be comfortable enough with this document that you can come here with a rules question and leave here with the answer to that rules question. Now, am I surprised some of you didn't know this? But when I personally need to know the answer to a rules question, I do go to the comprehensive rules. But when I try to find the answer, it's not like I just start here and keep reading until eventually I find the answer. Right? No, that's not actually what you do, or at least certainly it's not what anybody I know has ever tried to do. So what you do is you use the structure of the document and your understanding of the document in order to find that answer to that question a lot faster and a lot easier. And you definitely can get it a lot faster and a lot easier than just like starting at the top and reading until you get to it. So let's take a look at how that might happen. So if we scroll down a little bit here, we'll notice that there is a table of contents, and this is solid gold when you're trying to find the answer to rules questions. So we'll take a little bit of time and talk about like what all the different like sections are, but like broadly speaking, we've got this first section, the 100x rulings, and any ruling that's in this section is basically describing general game concepts. So literally in the game of Magic, these rules are called comprehensive because they talk about every topic from like literally the ground up. So there's a specific section that talks about what a player is. There's a specific section that defines what mana is, what numbers and symbols are used in the game, what permanents are. All this different stuff is specifically defined in the comprehensive rules. And so if you have a question about any of these general game concepts, you can look through here and you can see like which of these topics might be important. Then you've got like all the different parts of a card have their own special section. All of the types of cards that there are have their own special section. All of the game zones have their own special section. All of the different phases and steps in a turn have their own special section. And then this is a section that's devoted to how spells and abilities work. And it's not just casting spells and like activated and triggered abilities, but really it's like every facet of how different types of spells, abilities, and effects work. And then finally, there's this section here that talks about different mechanic specific topics. So we've got like all the different keyword actions and all the different keyword abilities have their own special rule in these two sections. All of the like block specific mechanics or maybe even set specific mechanics have their own special thing under one of these headings here. And then after the 700 sections, then we get to the 8 and 900, which is multiplayer and casual variants. So the rules regarding formats like that are going to be found under those sections. So, and this is literally what I actually do when I'm trying to do some research, is I'll go to the table of contents, and then I'll look through there and I'll see which thing, which of these headings seems like it might be related to the thing that I'm trying to find out an answer for, and then I'll just skip straight to whatever set heading that is. Now, I'll admit that what I said just now is maybe a little bit longer than the thing that I actually typically will do, because I have enough experience by this point that I know what all these headings are. So I'll generally like go in with an idea of what heading that I need to look under in order to see. But as you're developing that knowledge base, that step would be what you would do instead. So The next thing that I want to talk about is what are the, ways that you would study this. So, uh, if you have a rules question, you can go in and you can try and figure out what of those sections is relevant to your rules question. But another thing that I would do is I would definitely spend some time, like, even if you don't have any specific rules questions related to it, but like, especially if you do have a specific rules question related to a topic, would be to just like go through and read the whole section. And they're not long, they're maybe like a pages. But again, the idea is you want to expose yourself to this slowly, a little bit at a time over a long time. And so maybe if you're familiar with like the Pareto principle, you might have already grasped that none of not all of these have equal relevance to what we're trying to do. So the general idea is that like 80% of your rules questions say would be derivable from maybe 20% of these section headings. And we can quibble about like what the exact percentages might be, but the take home message is that all of these sections are not equally important. There's some that are more likely to help you than others. And so which ones would those be? Well, I'm glad you asked, because I did prepare this section here, which is the sections that I think is the most important. So what are the most important sections? It would be these ones here, and you can like take a screen capture of this or whatever. But if I were you, I would say maybe sometime when you're studying, these are the sections that I would take some special effort to get familiarized with, and as a hint to how important these are. This is also like where the bulk of the questions on, for example, the level 1 or even the level 2 judge exam are probably going to come from, would be these specific sections. So I noticed this one back here, 7xx, whichever is relevant. So what I mean by that is not all of the 700 series block specific mechanics are going to be relevant at any given time. So certainly if one of them is in the current standard format, I would say that like you would probably want to be familiarized with that specific section, but maybe not some of the other ones that might or might not be as likely to come up. So if we go back to the comprehensive rules here, now let's actually go through and get some practice for what it might actually look like to physically do some of the research. And just to prove to you all that this is the actual process that I use and there isn't anything like special or tricky about it, I'm going to be doing, like, for example, the last handful of daily rulings questions. So I'll kind of walk you through what it would have looked like for me to do the research required to answer those questions. So I guess the last one that I did, the most recent one, would have been where I talked about Sorcerer's Strongbox and Karplusan Minotaur. And so the question would, of course, be like with the Karplusan Minotaur's triggered ability happening at the same, during the resolution of the like Sorcerer's Strongbox activated ability. Is it going to, at what point is that triggered ability going to happen? Is the real like kind of question that the thing that I was treating boils down to. So again, like if you remember those specific topics that I said were important, abilities was one of them, and this section here is where you would find the specific part where it would be talking about like what a triggered ability is versus an activated ability. And so that's of course going to be an important distinction to know. And so the other thing that you would probably want to know is that like losing the game, which is what you would happen if the Sorcerer's Strongbox causes you to draw from an empty library. You would also need to know that was a state-based action. And so the real question kind of boils down to, at what point do all of these happen? So really, it's a question about like how the timing of this stuff worked. And so if you were on that level, if you remember, that was also one of the ones that I said that would be a good idea for you to read. So if we kind of skip down to the section where it talks about timing and priority, you would of course see this specific rule here under that heading, and again you can see that it's not super long. It starts here, and it goes down to about here. So you can see maybe about 1 page worth of material. Certainly reasonable to read it in like in one sitting if you were really interested in finding the answer out. And you don't have to like physically read all the way through. Of course, once you notice that one of these rules is not relevant to what you're trying to do, you can kind of skim through the rest of it. But here's the actual rule that answers the question that we were trying to do. It says each time a player would get priority, the game first performs all the applicable state-based actions. Then it repeats this process, and then triggered abilities are put onto the stack. And so using this rule, that is actually like sufficient to get the answer that I, of course, arrived at when I gave that question in a previous daily rule. And fun fact, you can also do the Control F to find these things a little bit more easily. So maybe you weren't on that same level of knowing that this was a timing and priority question, but if you were thinking about state-based actions, which losing the game from drawing with Sorcerer's Strongbox would be, then you might be able to find this rule here under the state-based actions section. And again, it says basically the same thing. Whenever a player would get priority, the game checks for any of the listed conditions of state-based actions, then it performs all the state-based actions, and then all the triggered abilities that are waiting to get put on the stack get to go on the stack. So again, we've got like a similar sort of rule that would help us to answer that question. Very nice, exactly what we're trying to do. Okay, so the one before that was actually kind of a meme question. It was Arkham's Slay plus attacking with the thing with to give it vigilance, and the base question was if we gave it vigilance after it attacked, would that untap the creature? And so in order to answer that one, we would need to know like about the keyword vigilance, and we'll talk about that a little bit later in the presentation. But now I wanted to show you maybe how I would get the rule citations that I needed for some of the other stuff with that question, which was related to how the Arkham's Slay ability worked in combat phases involving multiple players, multiple opponents. So again, if we remember, this section 8 here is where the multiplayer rules were. And so in particular, we were talking about something, maybe where we were talking about the attack multiple players option. Now, you probably wouldn't be able to come up with that by yourself. So you wouldn't have to actually read through all of this multiplayer rules section in order to find that this was the specific subsection that contained the answer to the question. Maybe if you read all these section headings, it would probably have to do with multiplayer rules, and it would probably have to do with one of these. And so, maybe with the process of elimination, you might be able to like piece your way through. But there is actually an easier way that you could have got to this section that has the rule that we need. And that's if you were to think, well, we also are kind of interested in, the combat phase. And in particular, we're interested in how the declare attacker step works. So let's take a look at the steps where we're talking about the combat phase, which is section 506. So instead of scrolling down, this is another pro tip. You can literally just use the like Control F search function to be able to like kind of zoom yourself straight to where it is. So here we are, the combat phase, and we were talking about how the Arkham's Slay would work, and the real crux of the issue is that it says activate this ability only if defending player controls a snowland. So if we read through here, we can see that during the combat phase, the active player is the attacking player, and those creatures that the person who's the attacking player controls, those can attack. And during the combat phase of a 2-player game, the non-active player is the defending player. So that's kind of interesting. Because it specifically called out that it would be a 2-player game. But here we have the sub rule where it talks about the combat phase of a multiplayer game, and it says there may be more than one defending player. So reading through that rule will give you the exact background that you needed in order to answer the question and figure out that there could in fact be multiple defending players, and in particular, the defending players are designated as such at the very beginning of the combat phase. So we also see here that it gives you a reference to the extra sections, and if you were to read that reference in here and find that reference, then you would be able to see Rule 802, the attack multiple players option is going to be relevant, and so that is in fact the section that I used in order to pull one of the other citations that I needed out. Where it talked about how attacking creatures that had abilities that referenced the defending player. It talked about how those types of abilities would function in a game where you could attack multiple players. So that's good. That's good. We got the system that works. The previous one here, improvise. Could you overtap using the improvise mechanic? That was the basic question that we were talking about. The next one, and this is by far the easiest kind of research that you will ever have to do. It's extremely straightforward. We know the question is involving the improvise mechanic, so literally we can just search for the improvise keyword. And again, remember, every single keyword and every single keyword action has their own special section in the comprehensive rules. Here's another pro tip. If you search for period space improvise, that is a great way to search for these, because that means you won't match with any like other incidental usage of the word improvise, or you probably won't that appears elsewhere in the document. You're going to get, like, from period space improvise, you're going to get the actual section that's dedicated to improvise, because that's how they're all formatted. So of course, if we do that search, we can find this answer. So very straightforward, very easy to do. And this is exactly the sort of thing that I would expect a level 2 candidate would be able to do. If you know that a specific rules question that you're trying to answer relies on the wording of something, some keyword ability in the comprehensive rules, I think you should be comfortable enough to be able to go in the comprehensive rules, use that technique that I just showed you to find out what the exact text of that keyword is, and then use that text that you find in that rule in order to get an answer to that question. And I really think that that's a reasonable ask for anybody who's considering becoming a level 2 or higher judge, that they would be able to perform that sequence of steps. And, obviously it'd be great if you would be able to do it like with some of the more advanced ones that I'm talking about. But at a very bare minimum, I feel like this should be something that's expected. And again, if we wanted to know exactly how the vigilance ability works, like from the previous question, we'd be able to find it pretty easily using that same exact methodology. And so there we can find the exact rules that I used to justify the answer that I gave for that question in the previous one. Okay, so the next one was concerning how Rex Nebula's animate ability or vehicle late ability corresponded with Optimus Prime, if you were to use it targeting the Optimus Prime. So two very obvious concepts that I want to call out here. We'll take a look at the table of contents. And the two concepts that I wanted to talk about was, one of them would be these are both continuous effects. So I think that it's pretty straightforward that we would know that we're dealing with interaction of continuous effects. But the other one is a little bit less obvious. The other like topic that I wanted to call out here would actually be this section here on the type line. The reason is because both of these continuous effects that are acting on the Optimus Prime would actually be stuff that changes its types. Now, if you remember when I had pulled up earlier, this actually was one of the sections that I said was one of the ones that you should probably, if you're going to be taking this sort of thing seriously, actually go through and read all. Now, I'll go ahead and take a few seconds to go through exactly how it breaks down. Now, this is the section of the comprehensive rules where, for example, it has a list of all the creature types and then like all the plane types, and there's one with all the planeswalker types. I'm not expecting people to like actually go through all of those. What I want to really bring people's attention to is how card types, subtypes, and then scrolling down a little bit here, super types, how those work, like the general way that they work. And also, very importantly, is these two rules here. Now, there's a lot of text there, and there's a lot of like examples, and it's kind of dense here, but those two rules are responsible for a large percentage of rules questions that have to do with cards changing their types and subtypes. So I think that like when you're going through this section, this would be a good couple of rules to like really take your time and digest through and like figure out what's going on. Because specifically in the question that we were talking about with Rex Nebula and Optimus Prime, specifically in that question, some of the like information from these rules is very important. So because neither of these abilities, or specifically because Rex Nebula's ability does not say that Optimus Prime is a vehicle in addition to its other types, this rule here indicates that because we're changing its type and we're not specifying that it retains a prior type, subtype, or super type, that means that we're falling under this rule here, and removing or setting the card types that way is going to completely overwrite all of the other existing card super types or card subtypes and card types that the card originally had. If you read through this entire rule, it does mention that, and that's where I got that justification from. Putting that together with the continuous effects information that you would be able to get from section 613, that is sufficient to answer that question. However, I did want to point out something that is a little bit, well, it's a little bit interesting here. So, okay, we're going to go down to the section here where it talks about the interaction of continuous effects. And we can see that we do have the correct rule here, the one that we need in order to get our correct answer. It says within layers 2 through 6, we're going to apply effects from characteristic defining abilities first, and then we're going to apply all the other effects in timestamp order. So this is the correct rule, and this is something that we're going to need in order to answer that question, because we are going to need that rule to tell us that Rex Nebula and Optimus Prime's more than meets the eye, or Optimus Prime's living metal ability, both of those are continuous effects that act in the same layer. So this tells us how we would apply both of those. But it kind of brings up a very interesting point that maybe could be a little bit confusing if you weren't expecting it, which says that we apply the effects from characteristic defining abilities first. And if you are not familiar with how characteristic defining abilities work, that could be a little bit of a problem. Fortunately, it does actually say specifically which rule that we need to look for in order to find a definition or a description of how characteristic defining abilities work. So we'll go ahead and search for Rule 604.3, and it turns out that you might have to search through a few times in order to actually get to it. But here it is, Rule 604.3. Some static abilities are characteristic defining abilities, and then it talks about how characteristic defining abilities are defined, and like a little bit about here. And here's the real meat and potatoes here is how it tells you how you can determine if a ability is a characteristic defining ability. And if you watch that episode, that was a very important consideration with regards to answering that question correctly. So let's kind of go through this rule that we found here, and we'll see if the living metal ability from Optimus Prime actually would qualify. So we found this rule again by reference in the section from the continuous effects interaction one that we were just visiting. So a static ability is a characteristic defining ability if it meets all these criteria. So let's see if living metal meets all these criteria. It defines an object's color, subtypes, power, or toughness. And that one is actually false. The reason is because we actually don't define the subtypes with the living metal. We're actually defining the card types. So we actually did not meet this criteria here. Another criteria is it's printed on the card that affects. This one we did get past. All these are other. All these are ors, so we don't really need to keep reading once we find one of them that's correctly identified there. Number 3, it does not directly affect the characteristics of any other objects, and it doesn't, so we're still good there. Number 4, it's not an ability the object grants to itself, and it's not. It's an ability that's already on the object. But number 5 is another one that's going to be an issue. It does not set the value of the characteristics only if certain conditions are met, because the ability of living metal only sets those characteristics at the times when it's your turn. That would be a certain condition being met, and so therefore we also have failed this criterion also. So again, this rule that we found using that cross-reference there was very helpful to helping us answer this question with the Optimus Prime and the Rex Nebula correctly. So that's another thing that kind of points at like what the like higher level versions of doing research would be. And of course, like if you're just starting out, I wouldn't expect someone who's just starting out to be aware of this kind of like extra nuance that they might have to consider for coming up with this correct answer. However, I would, of course, the higher and more mathematical, mature minded that a judge gets, I would start to expect this sort of thing from them. All right. So with that being the case, let's take a look shortly at the last of the things that I had talked about, and this is the question regarding political trickery, and the card, one of the targets for it becoming illegal. And so this was actually a pretty easy and straightforward research to do if, and this is a big if, you would have to know that exchange was a specifically defined rule. So again, you can see searching for period space exchange is great because we don't have to go through any of these other 35 different matches that might or might not be relevant to us. If we search for period space exchange, that's the only time that appears is when the game is defining what that word means. And again, if we are able to remember or know otherwise that the exchange was actually a reserved word, a keyworded action in Magic, then we would be able to easily find this rule here, which says that a spell that tells you to exchange something, if the entire exchange can't be completed, then no part of that exchange occurs. And of course, that is the rule that I needed in order to answer that question correctly in that episode. However, if I didn't know that, then maybe I would think that this was going to be a question that we needed to know about resolving spells or abilities. And so when we go to this specific section, we can find another rule that looks like it's very relevant to this situation. By the way, this is another very important rule that I expect a lot of questions can be answered by. So even though it's very long and there's like some long extra examples there, this one here is in one of the sections that I think is important to know, and this specific rule is one of the rules that I think is important to be familiar with. So in particular, the specific passage of this pretty long rule that might be relevant to the question that we're talking about would be this one here. It says that if all the targets for every instance of the word target are now illegal, then the spell doesn't resolve. Now that's not the case here because we have one legal target and one illegal target. So otherwise, the spell or ability will resolve normally and the illegal targets won't be affected. So if you did not know that exchange was a specific well-defined word that has its own specific rules meaning, then you might be tempted to find this rule and end up concluding quite naturally from that text what the actual answer would not be. This is, of course, an incorrect or at least misleading statement as it regards to this question, because the exchange keyword actually makes it very important that both of the targets remain being legal for the spell to do what it normally does when it resolves normally. Again, the political trickery would resolve normally, but it wouldn't do all the stuff that it says that it's going to do when it resolves, because exchange specifically requires you to have two objects that you can exchange. So that is like the last 5 different examples of daily rulings that I had done, and I think that gives you kind of a nice overview of how Magic the Gathering rules research can look. Now, of course, when I did it, I come with a lot more experience, so the like finding the correct answer or finding the rule that covers the correct answer is probably a little bit more of a streamlined process for me because I've done it so many times before. But at the same time, this is something that I think is certainly within the grasp of a lot of people who at least have the wherewithal to be able to, actually read this document and not be, put off by the fact that it's so long and technical, and be like something that I think that a lot of people could be doing. And once you get to a point where you're like familiar enough with like what all of the table of contents are, and also familiar enough that the what the general rules are that tend to have the most questions associated with them. Once you get that kind of familiarity built up, this is a very useful tool to have in your Judge toolbox. And it really is, like, at least for a lot of cases, completely plausible that you could find the exact rule that you need while you're in a live call with a player just that fast, like within the course of a few seconds that it would take to like run a simple search on your phone. And so that's the real power of this method. Once you, again, get familiar enough and acquainted enough with this document, that's something that I think that is very reasonable goal for a lot of people to be able to build to, especially if that's the sort of thing that interests you normally. But that is all I have for you today. How did you do? Join me again next time for another daily ruling. But until then, I hope you have a great day.